The federal government has released the modalities for the proposed national conference based largely on the Senator Femi Okuromo committee recommendations. However, several critical concerns have been raised. On this week's edition of the program, we'll look at the reactions to the modalities. It's good to have you join us on the program this week. I'm Gloria Umezuike. Now, according to late Gani Fawehinmi, a social crusader, the concern of a national conference is to remove all obstacles which have prevented the country from establishing political justice, economic justice, social justice, cultural and religious justice, and of course to construct a new constitutional framework in terms of the system of government, structurally, politically, economically, socially, and so you have it. Now, we are faced with a national conference as proposed by the federal government. Now, how can these issues be addressed? We'll be looking at this in our interview this week, but right ahead, let's listen to the Secretary to the Government of the Federation unveiling the modalities for the national conference.
The national conference shall hold in the Federal Capital Territory. C. The national conference shall tentatively last for 3 months and shall discuss any subject matter whatsoever except the indivisibility and indissolubility of Nigeria as a nation. This is to say that the unity of Nigeria is not negotiable. D. A conference management secretariat shall be established to manage, administer and run the affairs of the conference. E. Decisions at the national conference shall be by consensus, but where it is not achievable, it shall be by 75% majority. F. The national conference shall advise the government on the legal framework, legal procedures, and options for integrating the decisions and outcomes of the national conference into the Constitution and laws of the country. And finally, the national conference shall have a chairperson and a deputy chairperson. Both shall be of unimpeachable integrity.
The issue of the national conference has continued to raise diverse opinions and criticisms, especially on the possible outcome after the 3-month stipulated period, and of course in the face of the growing political tension across the country. And on this, I'm being joined by the Executive Director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. Watch. The Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, Mr. Clement Nwankwo, you're welcome to the program. But let's begin with the modalities for the national conference. This we know that many people, of course, say that the direction of the conference will determine the direction and shape the polity would take. So what really is your reaction to this?
How much shall I agree that it dictates the direction that the next politics would take, unless of course the conference takes a life of its own. I don't see that yet. Clearly it's important for Nigerians to have a conversation, to have a discussion about a future direction, political direction for the country, about a constitution that is really truly people owned. I'm not quite sure if this conference does it, answers the question. I'm not very sure, but certainly.
Why do you say so?
Well, I think it's a question really whether there are a couple of things. One, I still think that we need to look at how the composition of the conference comes about. Two, the environments that we are in at this time. It's an environment that when you look at it, for a process to have a future, you must also look at the surrounding legal environment. And I haven't seen this process being contextualized in the proper framework that would lead to results that people would anticipate answers for all time the question, the grundnorm, the document, the constitution for Nigeria.
So in other words, you think this is too soon? It's coming too soon?
No, it's not the time. If you're looking at the timing, then you really would be worried why this is happening with just 12 months to the next elections. And can this drive side by side with elections happening very soon and a groundbreaking discussion, argument, fights, seeking solution conference?
Coming just before the election.
Coming in the thick of the controversy that this election would be, because certainly when you look at the projections for the next elections, it's going to be very contentious.
So how much concern does it give you? Because really, ultimately, it's about the outcome. You know, not just about the talk shop and all of that, but how the outcome will serve the people, essentially.
The outcome is important. I think that when you look at it, you look at the various interests that are likely to be represented in the discussion. The composition that the government has announced indicates, I would agree, a plurality of interests being represented. The question is, how are these persons selected? And it's always going to be a question. It's always going to be an issue. How do you find what you call the representatives of the people? When you look at the composition or modalities for constituting the composition of it, a lot of the nominees are coming from either the government at the center or the government in the states. And then when you even have private sector nominees, a lot of it is going to be instigated and finalized by the government. So it's going to still be the question whether this is sufficient to answer what is called a people-driven grundnorm or constitution for Nigeria. You would never get it right, but as much as possible, the hope, the desire, the intention, and the aspiration and expectation of Nigerians is that you would constitute this in a way that says, yes, we own it. I'm not sure this answers it.
So should I say you're not impressed with the composition? Because, of course, this conference has raised a lot of pockets of disagreements. So looking at the composition, which is quite essential, are you satisfied with it?
I'm not sure we'll ever get to the stage where we're satisfied. I think it's going to be a constant question.
Is it fair enough or close?
I think that what it does is identify the sectors, the stakeholders, so to say, the famous word. I think it does that well enough. How does it then kick in the representatives of these interests? Becomes a question that on the balance, I don't think is satisfactorily answered.
What would you have wanted, really?
One, for instance, you have representation by what is called, you talk about representation by women. How did you arrive at specific types of organizations that I mentioned? You talk about representation of professional groups, and I'm not quite sure